Well, here we are again. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Now That You Asked Me. This is a production of First Unitarian Church of Honolulu in coordination with the All Believers Network. We are so grateful to Alelo for allowing us to bring you these conversations about what it means to live our faith in Hawaii, whatever that means for us. And today, we're very excited to have with us Kevin Block. Kevin is an attorney here in Hawaii, and we're going to be talking some about what the meaning of faith or what we believe in when we practice law here, not to mention perhaps some other avenues as well. So, first, Kevin, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. How's that sound?
Sounds pretty good, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
Good.
I guess one of the first things I like to ask people, since this is really focused on being in Hawaii, is when did you, were you born here or when did you come here?
Okay, so when I was 16, I grew up in Venice Beach, California, and I was really interested in school and getting good grades. And when I was 16, I told my parents that I was in love with my best friend. And they decided that it would be good to send me to boarding school somewhere.
And what was your best friend's name and gender?
His name was Steve, and he was a male.
I see.
And my parents were like, you should go to boarding school. So they were like, you should go to Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. And I was like, that doesn't sound fun, but I was into surfing when I was younger. So I'm like, how about Hawaii? And they're like, all right. So they brought me over here, and we went to Maui, and my dad is Jewish, but he became a Zen Buddhist. So the first place we landed was at the Zen Buddhist monastery in Haiku on Maui. And we spent the entire summer there, and I meditated and stuff like that. And then I remember one time, two of the people there, two of the Zen Buddhist people were like, hey, do you want to go to McKenna Beach one day? And I was like, sure. So we got in their Volkswagen Squareback and started driving to McKenna Beach, and they busted out all this marijuana, and we got to the beach and everybody took off their clothes, and I was like, oh, okay. But one of the cool things that happened when I was there that summer was the leader of the Zen community is this pretty famous guy, Aitken Roshi. And he was invited to go to Kaho'olawe in 1982, and I went with him. He brought some of us with him. And that was a cool experience because that's when I was first exposed to the concept of aloha aina. Like, there was this group there of Native Hawaiians that were part of this ohana that was trying to reintegrate Kaho'olawe back into the Hawaiian ownership and take it away from the Navy. And there was a bunch of famous Hawaiians there that I got to know personally because we were all there on this little island. At that time, there was no structures there. We just camped. We brought plants with us and planted plants. And we had to bring our own 5 gallons of water. And Dr. Emmett Aluli was there, and he hiked all over the island with us, and there was live ordnance everywhere. And then in the evenings, we would have these big bonfires, and people would talk about what aloha aina means to them. And they would cry when they were talking about what was happening to their land, and I felt it as a young teenager, and I was like, I understand that. They felt like this about this island and about these islands like you would a beloved older person in your family, like a grandmother or something like that. And to see it hurt and desecrated personally hurt them as it would if it happened to your relative. And they described that, and I felt it and internalized it and held on to it. And then later on, when, I don't know if this is off topic, but when the Mauna situation started, it reawakened inside me too, and I immediately knew where I came down on that issue, which is I support the Kia'i, just in case that wasn't clear. And I say that any opportunity that I can, because I knew in this culture, indigenous wisdom is ancient and predates all of this capitalism, and it's going to extend beyond it, and it matters. And when the kupuna in a place that belong to that place say that they want you to stop, then you have to stop. That's just, it's real simple to me. It doesn't, when I saw those kapuna, those older folks getting arrested up on the mountain, that's when I knew that were exactly what I needed to do, which was to be vocal about it and to encourage other settlers and people who are maybe feel, ooh, maybe I shouldn't get involved in that we can get involved. If we live here and we love it here, then we have to stand up and say something about it, especially if they're arresting nonviolent protesters. So that's an overlap of law and also how I got here.
Do you feel that when you talk about all the people who love to be here and love to live here, how much of that do you think comes from the work of the many, many, many generations of indigenous people who were working here, who were living here, who created this place? How much do you think that that flows from that, the desire for people to be here?
Oh yeah, it totally does. We stand on the shoulders and enjoy the fruits of the of this culture and their reaction to and interaction with the island is what created this beautiful culture where the land and the trees and the ocean have life, and they are treated with the same kind of respect that we treat living things, and then you can sense that, and people get off the plane and everybody talks, sort of smiles and talks about aloha, but what that is generations of this essence coming through that people feel, and they I talk all the time to haoles from the mainland who will be here or leave here, and like my husband's sister was here just recently, and she said she couldn't stop crying when she left, and she just felt something here. People say that all the time. I know you have visitors here, and then they're like, "Oh God, everything felt like synchronicity, and the air felt so gentle and fragrant, and when I had to leave, I cried." And so, I think that is, I think it's just, it's important too to recognize that we have a legacy of colonialism here that we also need to acknowledge and address, and not sweep under the cover or pretend like it's not our problem, and it sort of goes hand in hand with this place being perpetuated.
So I wanted to turn a little bit to the two, you sort of mentioned two faiths coming in Zen Buddhism and all the fun it sounds like you were having there, but you also talked about a lot of the Hawaiian religion that you've been adjacent to or perhaps practice. Can you say something about your own sort of faith background, or yeah?
So my mother was a refugee. She came here from Germany. She lived in Munich during World War II. She actually had bombs dropped on her, and towards the end of the war there were nightly air raids, and they kept their stuff by the front door, and they, as the planes would start to come in the evening, the air raid sirens would go off. They would dip the curtains of their windows in water and wrap them around them in case they got burning pieces of shrapnel on them, because they were fire bombs, and they would run to the bomb shelter. And when I was a little kid, my mom would tell me these stories, and I'd be like, you mean, I couldn't picture my mom running because she was my mom, and I'm like, did you walk really fast? And she's like, no, we sprinted, because I could see the planes were starting to come and the bombs were dropping. So she was a teenage girl when that happened, and then after the war, she was raised Catholic. After the war, she was disenchanted with the Catholic Church because they had a lot of stuff and people were starving. My mom and her family were starving after the war, and so when she got to the United States, she became a Seventh-day Adventist, and then she sort of developed her own strain of spirituality. And so when I was growing up, we celebrated Hanukkah. My mother, we went to church sometimes for the music. My mom was really into Bach and Mozart, so if I was in church, it was because there was a concert. But I was sort of ambivalent, and then as I started to, as my feelings of being gay started to awaken. I felt like the life of spirituality was excluded for me, for me. And then that just sort of got reinforced later on. I remember going to my first gay pride parade in San Francisco, and there was a group that was walled off, and they had signs that said, God hates fags and AIDS cures homosexuality. And I was like, all right, well, I didn't really question that or confront it. I just was like, that I get one or the other. And so my own spirituality came, I don't know if it's okay to talk about this, but it came from getting sober. That's where I rediscovered that I had always had, when I was a kid, I had a really profound and pure relationship with God, and I felt it all the time. I used to hike in the mountains, and I just felt it. I felt the presence of God all the time when I was a kid, and I would talk about it, and I was open with my parents about it, and they didn't tell me I was crazy. And my grandmother one time, she said, what are you going to do when I die? And I was like, I'm going to go up in the mountains and sing hallelujah. And she used to love to tell people that because she thought it was funny. And what I meant was that I was so, when I was a kid, I felt so connected to God that I wasn't even afraid of death. I felt like when you died, you just rejoined with the Creator. And I was like, why are people tripping? It's not scary. But then I went away from that for 20 or 30 years as I came out as a gay person, and then I've come back to it as a sober person.
That is a long journey, friend. Yeah. And somewhere along that time, you went and got a law degree, is that right? Can I ask, was that when you were singing Hallelujah in the Hills? Or was that
slightly after? After.
So somewhere in the 20 or 30 year period in the middle?
Yeah. So
what gave you that idea to do that?
What happened was, so this is a kind of a long story.
Okay. Let's, kind of keep it where it needs to be, but yeah.
All right. I'll give you the short version.
Okay.
When I was 20 and I was in Santa Cruz, I drove off a cliff and I ended up sinking to the bottom of the ocean in a van that was filling up with water, and I had a girl in the car with me. And
you got to get the mic closer for this.
I had a girl in the car with me. The van was filling up with water. We couldn't open the doors or windows. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. We were drunk and high, and I thought I was going to die. And I was able to, when the car filled all the way up with water, I was able to get her out through a hole in the windshield and swam in through the waves and got to the base of the cliff and sat on some rocks and got washed around and sat there for a couple hours, drifting in and out of consciousness. And when we were rescued, I was arrested for drunk driving, felony drunk driving. And when I was in jail, I had to go to jail for a couple months after that. My last name is Block, and the officers kept calling me Blockhead, until one time I told one of the officers, I walked right up to him, he was calling me on the loudspeaker, Blockhead, Blockhead. And I walked up to him and I said, my name is Block, not Blockhead, Block. And he took me into this little room and just like beat the crap out of me. And at that moment I was like, this is not okay. Like, you can't, this is a travesty. And that's when I decided I was going to become a lawyer, as he was beating my head against the wall. And that was the moment. It took a lot longer after that, but I just knew that I wanted to, at the time, work in prison law, but I really wanted to. I always hated bullies ever since I was a little kid, and when I got bullied, that's when I was just like, I'm going to use, my brain and my mouth to stop people from getting bullied. And so I wasn't really too sure what area of law I was going to go into. Like, I did work in prison law when I was in law school. I did an internship in San Quentin. I've also worked at legal aid, and I've done immigration law. So I knew that when you tell people you're going to go to law school, I went to law school during the OJ trials, and so people were like, you're going to be one of those shitty lawyers. What I decided was I was going to be a lawyer that worked in the public interest, that helped people, and I couldn't be a doctor because I don't like blood, and I just don't think about things scientifically. So I was like, the best way I can help the most amount of people is to be a lawyer.
And what kind of law do you practice now?
So before I took the bar, I started working at the county of Maui as the director of immigrant services, and I learned immigration law, just like the nuts and bolts of it. I didn't know I was interested in it, but then I started becoming interested in it, and it organically felt right because my mother was an immigrant, and then I took the bar while I was working there and passed it, the California bar, but it was a long time after I went to law school. And then once I passed the bar, I opened my own practice doing immigration law. And I totally, totally love it. But when I started it, it wasn't like the hot topic that it is now. Like, you tell people that you're doing immigration law, most people didn't really know what that was or what it involved. And now, everybody watches the news and has opinion about asylum or, what we should do about people who are here illegally. But that was why I was interested. And I feel like the reason I love it is because of my family. My son is also an immigrant, and my foster kid who became my son, and my mother. And I also feel like it is like the forefront right now of where the battle of what kind of a country we want to be is being fought. All of the noble ideas that we arose from, and the noble ideas that are the genesis of asylum and other big parts of immigration law are all under attack right now. That's why I feel like it's an important area.
Do you remember when you were sworn in as an attorney?
Yes, I do.
Where was it?
It was on Maui, and it was in Judge Cordoza's courtroom, and my mother was there. She died in 2015, and I was sworn in on October 17th, 2013. So she was in a wheelchair. My husband was there. About 30 of my friends were there. It took a big group of people to get me to that point, and it was a pretty big moment.
Did you know you were going to be swearing an oath to the Constitution of the United States that day?
Oh yeah, I feel like the Constitution belongs to the immigration lawyers and the people who fight for the public interest law.
Why?
Because the principles of justice and fairness and mercy are embedded in our Constitution, and the both sides of this argument wield it, but if you read it, it supports the notions of justice tempered by compassion and equity tempered by mercy. It really does. I mean, that's how I feel about it.
Would you say today it is really not just the Constitution, but justice, or the sense of justice in a nation, is really one of your guiding? Is it like one of your guiding principles today?
I just, for me, what's going on in my heart when I do what I do has less to do with the law and more to do with my sense of right and wrong. And I just know when these people come to my office, like over the years, hundreds and hundreds of people have come to my office with their children and their stories, and I just know that there is nothing wrong with moving across the face of the earth. People have done that since the beginning of time. And if you find yourself here and you what I like to think about is, what would it take to get you to put everything you own into a backpack and leave the place that you love and flee? It's got to be something. And if you've gotten yourself here and you're sitting in my office, then I don't know. I don't know if this is a religious principle or a personal ideological position, but I believe in the preciousness of each human being that's sitting in my office. I know that sounds a little bit, I don't know, it sounds a little bit crazy these days to say
or,
that.
or holy, but sure. Okay, you have your word, I have mine.
I mean, people don't feel that way anymore, and I totally do. I don't think about it and intellectually make that decision. I literally see that person and I'm like, that's an amazing confluence of all these different miracles to have that person sitting there right now, and I'm gonna knock myself out trying to help that person. And they're such like lovely, dignified, amazing folks too, like without fail. And I'm stereotyping, but it's true. Like they, I don't charge a lot, but they try their hardest to pay their bills, and all they care about is what is this going to do to my kids, and they're just so genuinely full of effortless integrity that it just reaffirms that I am right when I know that those people are not the problem. Those people are not going to take away your jobs. They are here struggling just like the rest of us. And the fact that sorry, I'm going off on this a little bit, but the fact that we are going in and tearing apart these people's lives instead of just leaving them alone and letting them, be here and thrive is the tragedy of what I'm fighting against. And it circles back to my mother, because my mother lived in Munich during the rise of the National Socialist Party, and she talked about what we would be like when we were kids. We were like, what was it like when the Nazis were, taking people away? And she's like, well, from my friends at school, I heard that they would knock on your door early in the morning because they wanted you to be home, and then they would come into your apartment with guns, and sometimes they would take the parents and sometimes they would take the kids, but they would separate the families, and that was their way of really, devastating you. Is they wouldn't group you together and take you; they would pull you apart. And she died in 2015. But as this has started happening, I started to realize that my clients, when ICE comes for them, they get knocks on the door at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning because they're going to be home. And sometimes it's the parents they take, and sometimes it's the kids. Mostly it's the parents, and it's the same thing. And these are just people trying to live their lives. And we could address this issue. If there is an issue about needing to, for policy reasons, button up or tighten up immigration, that's totally fine, but you don't need to be tearing parents away from their kids. Everybody knows that that's wrong.
Do you think it's somehow, what comes up for me hearing this happens in Hawaii is somehow more troubling because of what we are inheriting from the people who've gone before us, with the great gift of Aloha Aina. Can you talk about that, what it feels like to love this place and then to be experiencing this?
Yeah, I mean, people, there was a client that came to my office recently, and she was from Tahiti, and she had come a couple months earlier to participate in a Polynesian dance festival, and she made costumes for some of the dancers, and they gave her money for these costumes, and there was a big fete. It's called a Polynesian fete, and there was a dance contest, and it was 3 or 4 days long, and then she went back to Tahiti. Well, when she came back again with all of her friends and family, they stopped her and detained her at the border in Honolulu and said, you violated the terms of your visa the last time you were here because you worked on a tourist visa. And she called me, and I was just thinking, people in this region have moved, the Hawaiians settled here because they moved across the ocean. And in Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, people, moved around and settled, and migration is part of our history as human beings. And it is weird for the United States and for us, as Americans, to come here to Hawaii in this place that is not technically not ours, and remove other people who are also find themselves here. It's really almost surreal, this sort of audacity of it, and that's my answer to that question. It feels like I know that it's wrong.
And so can you tell me some about this call you've had to work with folks who need your help? I mean, what have been some of the standout experiences, the folks who, whether it's a particular vulnerability they have or something like that? Can you tell me some about, you don't have to get into specific cases, but give us a sense. For a lot of people watching probably don't know what's really going on in immigration court. Like, what are the things that, most people, I think, oh, well, if the person has a good case, and if it seems like they should get to stay, then they get to stay, right? It's only the bad people, the naughty people who are going away. I think that's a pretty fair assumption. People kind of think that who don't know. Can you tell us something about that assumption?
So right now, pretty much the current administration's policy that is being enacted each day in immigration court, because just a small technical point, immigration court is part of the administration. It's the Department of Immigration courts are unusual because usually courts fall under Article 3 in the Constitution, but immigration courts are part of the Department of Justice, which is Article 2. So it's an unfair thing right from the beginning. They're enacting the policies of their boss, which is the Attorney General of the United States, appointed by the President.
So we're sitting in a courtroom right now.
Yes.
And there's a very high, big thing here. There's a podium. There are these beautiful chairs and this table. This is what a lot of courtrooms look like. Mm-hmm. Is this what immigration courtrooms look like?
So no. Immigration courtroom, I heard somebody describe it as life or death matters in traffic court.
Yeah.
So it has this weird feeling of, on the one hand, you've got situations where people, like yesterday, I was in court yesterday, with a person who, I'll change the country and the situation slightly, but he's afraid to go back to a country in Central America because he arrested a drug dealer who was extradited to the U.S. So he stopped 11 pounds of cocaine from coming in the United States, and then this guy kidnapped him and held his guy, not this guy, but his friends kidnapped and held this guy and threatened his wife and his 2 little kids. They knew all about him. So we're in court discussing this matter of if he, his contention is that if he's sent back, he will be killed. And we're doing it with literally the DHS attorney is looking on her phone and tapping it with her long fingernails, and the judge is irritated because, it's close to lunchtime and she hasn't eaten yet, and it's just like a little room. It doesn't look like this, and it's they were hung up on the fact that little details in the person's declaration were different than what he said. And I after doing this for a number of years, I'm losing my patience, and I continuously say now in court, when a person flees for their life from their country, some of their documents are lost because they wanted to know where are his original documents. And I'm like, he doesn't have them. Sometimes when you experience trauma, you forget details, and DHS will hone in on dates. Well, you said this happened on April 15th. Well, it looks like it really happened in March. And this poor guy is from a country where he doesn't know that if he thinks that if the judge gets irritated with him or his case fails, that they're going to cuff him and lead him out of the courtroom and take him away from his wife and kids today. And no matter how many times I tell him that that's not going to happen, they've told me, they've shared with me honestly that that's what they think is happening, and they're in utter terror as they're in the courtroom. And
do you think? I mean, I've heard that folks who have had near passes with their mortality have less of a tolerance for people who seem not to be engaged in life or death situations. I'm not saying I would ever wish upon anyone a near-death experience, but do you think that some aspect of that experience in the van, or maybe even with the police officer, has clarified for you just what is on what side of what matters and what is on the other side of what matters?
Totally. Yeah, I feel like, being a recovering drug addict, having been homeless before, having had several near-death experiences and some ongoing medical issues where basically they told me I was going to die and then I didn't, and I'm still here. All of that has deepened my sense of, the importance of the sanctity of life and the preciousness of each person. And the surge that was at the border last summer and during the past year has, some of those folks have bonded out and gone to places where they have relatives or friends, and so some of them have ended up here. And like the Big Island has a large contingent of people from Honduras who are working in the coffee fields, and Maui has its own contingent of Guatemalans. And yeah, we're seeing not a surge, but an increasing number of folks who are fleeing a destabilized region, and anybody who has investigated the historical context of that region knows that we are partially responsible for that destabilization. It's the same thing, only slightly different. That applies to the large number of Micronesians that are here, that people are, upset and offended by. But we went to that part of the world and bombed it for 12 years and did nuclear testing and forced people off of their home islands and caused them to have all these strange diseases. And we continue to have a large presence in that part of the world and a missile base and free reign for our Navy. And so that is our kuleana, like we're responsible for that happening to them. And so if they come here and seek medical help and education, we have to realize that is part of our duty. Just like if people are fleeing Honduras and Guatemala because our war on drugs has caused, corruption and impunity for the drug, and the United States' need for drugs is causing a demand that they're supplying, then we should at least be able to argue in court that that this isn't happening in a vacuum, that there's a context and that matters, why they're here seeking asylum.
Is that ever allowed? Is that relevant? Probative?
I mean, I throw everything in there in my closing all the time, but that's just so that I can talk about it later. But it becomes more useful I have a bunch of cases that are at the Ninth Circuit, and so that's where they're willing to sit there and go, okay, this is a larger argument. Immigration court, it doesn't really help the person's case, but I bring it up anyway so I can preserve it as an issue.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the problems, and we could talk more, I'm sure. But somehow you keep doing it. You keep doing the work. There must be a reason. There must be some kind of, not just an idealist hope that someday things will work out. There must be times that things go well, or times that give you some kind of satisfaction, if not actually hope. Can you say a word or two about something like that?
So, I think what it is I obviously have developed my own concept of what God is, and I have left behind some of the more traditional notions of a moment when you die, when you stand knocking on the door to heaven and you are judged for your life. But I think that is part of my religious spiritual underpinning for why I do what I do, because I feel like I am I'm judged by my Creator for how I've chosen to love my fellow man, and I think the best that I can do is find what I'm good at. Like if I were good at building swimming pools, I would build swimming pools for kids to swim, and that's how I would love my fellow man. And when I was young, my mother was like, wow, you write really well and I can't win an argument with you, so you should be a lawyer. And I was like, all right, well, if that's what I'm good at, and then I can maximize my service to my fellow man. And I believe that is, even though I'm not traditionally religious, that is a principle that I live by, that you need to figure out what you're good at and then have as many of your brothers and sisters benefit from that as possible. And then when you are taking your last breath, you can be like, all right, I did what I was supposed to do while I was here.
Yeah, a lot of people are looking for something like that in their life. It's really, do you count yourself lucky that you found it, like every day? This is the pastor telling me because you should.
Every single day, I'm in this total bonus rounds, and I was telling my friends that I'm here with, because court was hard yesterday and it was difficult, but a bad day doing what I do now is better than my worst day before, when I had no purpose and I was drifting and people were worried about me. Now, doing what I do, I love it so much that I don't even, like, I have friends my age who are talking about retiring. I don't want to retire. Like, I want to be pushing my walker into courtroom and having people just be like, oof, that guy needs to, like,
hang it up. Well, you've talked a little about your mother. I'm going to read this poem and I want to get your take on it. The New Colossus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand, a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, she cries. With silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
Yeah, I mean, I know this isn't about you, but when I was describing the book that I'm writing a book about this and my mother and how she influenced me to become an immigration attorney, and you said Mother of Exiles, which is one of the lines from there. And yeah, I mean, that to me, I think Jesus might have been an immigration attorney if he were alive right now. Not to be super like, but I mean, I just think that is where God wants us to welcome people, and the principles of mercy and bringing people in and making them feel safe are the most sacred spiritual principles that I can see. And I know that a lot of the allies that we have as attorneys in this fight come from the faith community, and so I know a lot of the different what are they called, denominations, or
sure, yeah.
A lot of the different churches are on board with us with this, and I think that's as it should be. Like, I think this is a spiritual, deeply, theological question of what do we do with other people when they come here from other places. It's in the Bible, isn't it?
It is. In many places.
What's that Matthew one where he's like, you know, when you were hungry, I fed you.
Mm-hmm.
When you were thirsty,
naked, I clothed you.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that one.
I'm gonna show you something.
Oh, dude!
I'm bringing you a gift. You don't have to get into the details or anything, but a friend of ours asked me to give you this.
Oh, God.
Actually, all of these.
Okay, would it be weird if I start crying now? Just
But
yeah, so I guess I can say a little bit about this person.
yeah, maybe not the name, but
This
yeah.
person was shot, stabbed, raped, and just brutalized, not just in her country of origin, but on the journey here and after she got here, when she was
Yeah.
in custody, in our government's custody. And right now, she's houseless, and we semi won her case. She's allowed to stay here now, and these are the paintings that she makes, even though she's gotten a raw deal in life. This is what comes out of her, and we actually showed these in court. We showed them in court because, you know, everybody talks about the analysis is always what are they taking from us,
Mhm.
and not what are they giving us. And
Speaking of taking, the reason I'm giving these to you is because people are breaking into her car and taking them. Talking about taking, it's like the thing that she is doing to help herself heal and to bring beauty into the world. People are breaking into her car and stealing. So she's giving it to people that she can trust and care about, to care for them.
wow,
Yeah.
cool. This is my favorite, the bamboo.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. I kind of brought these out not just to be, not as a surprise, but also as a gift, but just to kind of bring home some of the, I think a lot of people that are thinking about immigration law aren't thinking about migrants, aren't thinking about the people that are really going through this,
Mhm.
and the families, and who are just trying to find a home. And I think one of the things I'm curious about is how is it that helpful to make that case to as many people as possible, or is it better to just focus on the people who understand what is going on and trying to get more help from them? The question my folks always want me to answer is, well, what do we do now? Or like, what is the best course of action to have some kind of relief or some kind of safety for folks?
I mean, I don't know. I think that sometimes I think about 20 or 30 years ago when gay people couldn't get married, and there was a lot of stigma and shame and discrimination, and then what we all did as a community was start to infuse the popular culture. This is my opinion, but I feel like the gay rights movement and other civil rights movements are linked to the immigration movement in the sense that all these groups are subject to stereotyping and mischaracterization, and they are used in politically difficult times to focus people's fear that they're going to lose something that they have or not get something that they want. And the way to combat that is to know somebody who's just like it was the way that gay people were able to assert their civil rights and have the support of the majority of the population was because everybody started to know a gay person because we came out and we were starting to be on DIY fix-it shows. There were lesbian couples that were remodeling their kitchens, and and we were in, music videos, and we started coming out and being at soccer practice with our kids, and parents were talking to other parents that were, had two dads or two moms, and we just, not aggressively, but just sort of let ourselves be seen. It's harder for immigrants because letting yourself be seen can put you in danger, but the reason that the DACA movement succeeded was because these young, amazing immigrant activists who were born in other countries but who grew up in the United States have been willing to take the risk of making themselves visible and coming out, so that as a person who may be ambivalent or not really politically sophisticated thinks about the issue, and they hear on TV news that that a Mexican person is a rapist, and that those people are trying to take your jobs, and they can think, well, but I actually know somebody who's Mexican and he's super cool. He basically is just like me. And so I guess that's one way, one approach is to just keep talking about the positive. It seems like we shouldn't have to, but the contributions that immigrants are making, and the fact that they're here among us, and asking people to make the effort to get to know somebody who's here. Like if you met the person that made these paintings, I guarantee that she would win your heart. I mean, people who meet her love her. And then you could hear about asylum and think, oh, well, that's just my friend that I just met who's this painter who does deserve safety and the chance to live.
Yeah. Oh, it is, it's tough. It's tough. One of the things that that comes back for me, though, is, you've talked about your family, you've talked about, some other things, and I know this is a passion for you and it's your career, but there has to be times of, respite or calm or peace. Like, where are you finding that now? Like, what do you do for to restore yourself, to restore your own soul? Because I know that fighting all the time against immovable objects requires care of the person who's doing it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I train like physically like I'm an athlete. Like I don't eat meat, I don't eat sugar, I exercise every day, I pray and meditate twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. I don't do that stuff so that I can, I don't know, I have to do it because it's really important who shows up in court that day. Like, prep for court for me is, a large portion of it is writing the brief, assembling the evidence, reviewing the file, and knowing it. And then I get that done a couple days ahead of time. And then the 2 or 3 days before court, it's like, what am I eating? How much am I exercising? I'm not watching TV. I'm praying. I'm praying for God to inform my words and my decisions and my intuitions. Like, I want the me that's showing up there to be channeling this concept of God that I have, because I believe that that's more powerful than my abilities as a lawyer. And if my God can speak through me, I feel like my client has the best chance. And I also need to pray for God to relieve me of my own personal attachments to what's going on, and my selfish reasons for things. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes into it for me. And I forgot the question, but I hope I answered it.
Yeah, it was, what are you doing for yourself? How? Yeah. And I guess, if someone is, say, I don't know, something that, when I was since you already outed me as a lawyer, when I was a young lawyer, I wanted to do public interest work. And then I went to law school, and moral kind of relativism seeped in a little bit to, and I ended up doing intellectual property, in New York City, and doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was a call later to say, no, like what, I had this impulse, like this was there. And I know that you're a lawyer and there's people that are looking for their passions in all kinds of areas, but what would you say to young lawyers who are just entering, who are just getting that glimmer of some kind of idealism or hope, whether it's about immigration law or something else, like what is the message that you want them to have?
I mean, I think that making a sort of general decision about whether your life's work is in service of others or in service of yourself is important. And I don't think that either one is better than the other. I just think that once you make that initial decision, then I think that, you know, having a job that is a calling. My mother was a nurse and she described it as a calling. That involves having a spiritual life so that you can feel called. And I think that the way I ended up becoming an immigration lawyer was not a plan that I had. It was something that you know led me forward, like I was being carried on a wave, not, you know, paddling upstream. And so I think that, I mean, I think that's what I would say about that.
So we have a few minutes left, and I'd be a terrible interviewer if I let you get away with saying you're writing a book and they didn't ask you about the book. So tell me about the book.
So the book is called Mother of Exiles.
Ah.
Thank you. You're gonna be on the desk cover. So yeah, I have been part of the way I've been processing what's been going on is I've been writing about some of the hearings I go to. I changed the identities of the respondents, and I changed the countries where they're from. And if it ever is published, there's going to be a lot of work to make sure that nobody feels like their story is being told without their permission. But I've been writing their stories, and I've also been writing the story of my mother, and then the story of my son, which I'll say really fast, is going to be in the book also. And my son, when I was working at the county for immigration, these parents said, there's a kid at the beach, we think he's homeless. I met up with him. I called him team meeting at his high school. He was a freshman at high school. And he was this nervous, skinny little kid, and he was sleeping in a van. His mother died when he was 12, and his father was violent, so they fled from him. And then him and his older brother were in an orphanage, and they escaped climbing down the walls of the orphanage and walked through the desert to California, and then got their way to Hawaii, and then his older brother was deported. So when I met him, he was 14 years old and probably weighed about 90 pounds, and he was living in a van parked at Honokawai Beach. And the first time I saw him across that table, I made eye contact with him, and I'm like, I'm going to ignore professional boundaries and, you know, not in all the counseling I've ever received about not getting emotionally involved in a person's life, and I'm going to get involved in this person's life. And I started getting involved with him, and I got him this immigration benefit where he was able to get a green card, and he needed to be in a foster placement, and he didn't work out in his first couple foster placements because he lied and because he had these strange behaviors, which I totally understood because of my background. So I became his foster dad, my husband and I, and then later on we adopted him so that he has a family and a last name. So my son is also an immigrant, just like my mother is, and he's featured in a big way in the book because he's also why I do what I do, because he thinks that I've
That's right.
He thinks that I've saved his life, but he really saved my life. And he thinks that I've given him so much, but he's really given me everything and a reason to fight. And he had a daughter. He got married and had a daughter, so I have a granddaughter. Another reason to
Grandpa.
fight. Yeah. And I have another one on the way. She's pregnant. And guess what his name is going to be?
What?
Kevin. It's a boy.
That's awesome.
Ooh, am I allowed to say that? Yeah, everybody knows.
Yeah. Well, I guess we are kind of wrapping in on this, and I want to thank you for sharing so much of that. I want to ask, like, how proud was your mom of you?
That's a great question. So, my mom, Germans are not super demonstrative. Like, my mother was quietly, secretly proud, and she let me know very rarely, but in ways that really stood out. And really, the most important thing about my relationship with my mother was that I became sober, so I was able to be present for her and hold her hand when she died, and to just be a good son finally at the end. And I think that's what she was most proud of. I don't think she cared that much that I was a lawyer. She was kind of like, it's about time. You know, she was very, she expected a lot from us kids, and the thing that I was most glad to be able to deliver on was just to be able. My husband and I took care of her the last 5 years of her life. She lived in our house, and we fed her, and she had a stroke, so we took care of her until she died.
Wow. Well, a good son to a mother of exiles.
You're a good son.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you so much for your time and for your candor, your vulnerability, your openness. This program being about faith in Hawaii, I think sometimes people were wondering, oh, you're going to talk to a lawyer, we're going to talk to him about. And I don't think I really need to explain myself if they've watched this full episode about what a faith life can mean and what a life of meaning can be in this world that we're living in right now. So I want to thank you for that. Off camera, I want to thank Stuart Hesh, who's here, part of our team. And I want to thank, again, always First Unitarian of Honolulu for producing this, and all of my wonderful partners at Olelo for making sure it's distributed. And once again, thank you, Kevin, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, and I hope what I said was useful to somebody.
Thanks very much.
All right.
All right.